Hello and welcome. Today, I'm joined by Hannah Elderfield Cramp, the VP of Growth, Partnership and Strategy at Rubix and the co-founder of Knightseth. Hannah sits at the intersection of legal world, running a business that coaches lawyers on elite advocacy while driving strategy for a major American tech firm. Hannah, welcome to the Growth Speech.
Thank you so much for having me, Alex. I'm excited.
Our pleasure. You have experience in different legal systems. You originally come from Sweden and you work with companies all over the world. Can you tell us a little bit about how those different insights shaped your view on business and the legal field today?
Yeah, of course, that would be my pleasure. So, as you've already alluded to, actually from Sweden originally, the legal world has always been in the background. My parents were involved with it in different ways. And at school, I was the person who actually enjoyed sitting in on court trials. But the difference here is that Sweden operates a rather unique Nordic civil law system. And there was always something about the UK common law tradition that genuinely fascinated me. So I did what anyone would do. I packed up and I moved to do a law degree in England. So I completed the full academic training, my postgraduate degree included, and I did undertake legal roles on both sides of the North Sea. So I have that exposure. But somewhere along the way, I realized that I don't want to be a traditional lawyer. There was something about it that didn't resonate with me entirely. So I had these skills. I had particularly the language skills, negotiation skills, and as you mentioned, an understanding of two completely different legal systems and the cross-border nuances that come with it. And I wanted to be able to use these in a less conventional way. So I took a non-linear path, I suppose. I did do some work at a personal injury firm in the UK, which reaffirmed my decision that I didn't want to be a traditional lawyer. And I eventually took a role at an intellectual property law firm specializing in license compliance and anti-piracy. So I joined predominantly because of my legal skills and my global knowledge rather than the legal side. And that's where things started to click for me. So the legal knowledge, the cross-border experience, and the commercial instinct created a thread that then runs through everything I do now. So as you mentioned, that translated into me co-founding and being a director of Knightseth, which is a professional services company specializing in helping lawyers elevate their professional impact. And at Rubix, I work again in a really global environment. So it's been a common theme throughout my entire career, even if it's not been linear.
Well, thank you for sharing. I want to double click on that awareness of what, for every person is a good fit, and if there are skills and the passions put to the best use. What was it for you personally that initially attracted you to the law, but also made you think that the traditional path is not for you? And maybe you can give that from the perspective of advice to another lawyer that could be excellent what they do, but the right people and that fit can be improved for them.
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked, because one of the main things that law actually teaches you, and what attracted me to law without realizing it at the time, is it teaches you communication skills. So it teaches you to communicate with specificity. It teaches you analytical thinking. It teaches you problem solving, specifically under ambiguity, verbal reasoning, persuasion, all of those things that we associate with lawyers, but we don't necessarily appreciate is the reason it might attract us to law. So there was that, but taking it further back, I think I was always just simply fascinated with the psychology behind why people committed crimes. I think, possibly more from a criminal law point of view, there was a fascination with what drove that sort of behavior. And I realized that that fascination doesn't translate into passion always. So just because you're really fascinated by something doesn't mean that you're good at it. And I was happy to shelf that fascination as more of a hobby or an interest rather than something I should pursue as my career. But what it also taught me, as I mentioned, those transferable skills, such as communication, was that there are so many other careers within those skills that you can try, and you don't have to follow the traditional career path. I'm surrounded by plenty of absolutely brilliant lawyers, and I want them to stay being brilliant lawyers. But for me, I wanted to be able to use my language skills. I wanted to be able to use the power of persuasion. And more than anything, I wanted to be able to teach people that.
Mm.
So what created the alternative route for me was seeing the educational system in the UK compared to Sweden. So in Sweden, it is a very, very linear route. You go to law school, you finish, and you are essentially a lawyer. Apologies to any Swede I'm now offending by saying that, but ultimately it is rather linear. In the UK, it's much more focused on having a dynamic set of skills. So you have advocacy training, and for anyone who is a UK solicitor, they will know that they will have a level of advocacy skill included as part of that. And it's even more detailed, of course, if you go on to become a barrister in the UK. But I saw that there was a gap in Sweden where you had these really talented people who had a vast amount of knowledge when it came to the law, but they didn't always know how to communicate that. And that was, I suppose, the start of me wanting to do something slightly different with my skill set.
Makes sense. From your personal experience, when it comes to different skill set, different languages, and different cultures that you worked in, what do you think is a healthy balance between being exposed to different areas and having that variety in the skill sets and the tools that you use, balancing that with being very in-depth on one topic, on practicing one type of law in one type of community and culture? What's the healthy combination, in your opinion, from what you've seen?
So for me, the healthy combination is all about being intentional and finding your niche. So in terms of being intentional, that means that you are selecting the things for a reason. So if you are practicing a specific area of law, you're doing that for a reason. I think one of the biggest mistakes law firms do is they become an all-you-can-eat buffet. So you have a problem, come to us, and we will feed you ultimately. That becomes quite fragmented. It often doesn't unlock that long-term sustainable growth. So I like to take it back to basics. Get really good at the basics. Be clear on your niche. Trim the fat and be clear on what your core offering is, and then double down on that. Make sure that you're spending your time where it matters. And I know that can sound overly simplistic, but a lot of the time what we do, and as lawyers as well, is we focus on what's in front of us rather than what drives revenue. So make sure that you have your time versus revenue allocation sorted, and that will help you be clear on where you should be focusing your time.
I think that's a great advice for many managing partners to consider. One thing that we hear quite a lot when we talk with different law firms and with other businesses, I wouldn't say that it's exclusive to the law, but that notion that our business is unique. And the funny thing that I observed, that the more experience you've seen of working with different lawyers in different fields in different countries, the more you actually see that that's not necessarily true. There are a lot of patterns that are the same for different industries. And if you get good at recognizing them, you can help. But from that personal perspective, for individual firm, for individual lawyer, it's very tempting to say that our circumstances are unique, and because of that, we have to do things in a certain way. With your experience, again, in different cultures and different languages and jurisdictions, do you agree that there are unique law firms and circumstances that lawyers have to communicate in? Or do you actually see more of the common patterns that you identify and work with the lawyers through?
So the way I see this, because I do approach it really globally, I look a lot at the local nuance. So yes, there are patterns in any law firm, and in a lot of jurisdictions, there are patterns. Law has very similar applications across the world. But what tends to go wrong, in my view, is that they don't always appreciate the local nuance. So using my experience with what I do at Ruvex, for example, which, disclaimer, isn't a law firm, but we have some fantastic lawyers working with us, is that a compliance outreach, for example, that works in the US can read as really aggressive or even threatening in other markets. And the same goes for a pitch, for example. A pitch structure that lands in London can fall really flat in Tokyo. And the cost of getting that wrong isn't just a failed one-off client engagement. It can actually be brand damage to that client or to that client reputation. So for me, absolutely, yes, I do agree that there are similarities and there are patterns, and it's important to tap into those patterns for efficiency, but also be very clear on what does change and cannot change depending on where you are in the globe. So have a standardized core identity, agree what can and should be localized across content. But when I look at what we do at Rubik's, for example, we operate with senior people in markets across over 30 countries, and we do that under one intelligent framework. So it's the same data layers, the same governance standard, but it's adapted for the local nuance. And that's key. So I don't think patterns is a bad thing. In fact, that can help us drive efficiency many times.
Do you think part of the challenge right now is that many decision makers could be relying on AI without giving that nuance to AI when the question has been asked? And because of that, the output that they're getting and their initial response, whether it's a client communication or internal communication with another office, could miss the mark because of that.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I have to say in 2026, I don't think it comes as a surprise to anyone that we're going to be covering AI to some extent. You know, it's natural in today's world. And in a world where AI and tech can help drive those efficiencies, what I'm seeing is that we're actually increasingly craving genuine human input, genuine human connection, and real personalities. So this goes for brands, it goes for companies, and the people we work with. So what you were mentioning is everybody has a tool, and everybody should have a tool if they don't already have a tool. But what the biggest gap is at the moment is that people don't have the knowledge to check what the output is. So what you said there, or how I read it, is that yes, we get carried away with these efficiencies, and we can do things at a much faster speed than we could before. What I would urge people is to remind them that strategy is very much an organic learning process. You have to do to get better at it. And I think we sometimes fall into the trap of thinking that AI and tech can automate everything for us. Absolutely, it can automate a lot. But don't let AI outsource your thinking and your responsibilities completely. That's where it will be really dangerous for lawyers, particularly. So yes, AI, fantastic. I'm a big advocate for it, but it is increasingly going to put a premium on the human experience alongside the efficiency of automation.
I wonder, in your work and in your personal view, what's the significance of that personal style, personal taste when it comes to the communication and actually developing in the communication the way that's, like you said, translates the person and not just says the right thing on top of of course, the local nuance we spoke about, making sure that not everybody sounds the same. Because with anything, any communication or document written by AI, that's one of the things that, and for us from the marketing perspective, becomes very obvious when something is written AI. It comes very synthetic. And even if the information is good and the advice could be good, it's perceived very differently if we don't get the sense that it's a real human behind the communication. So maybe in your work, how do you help somebody that you work with develop that communication style that's uniquely there?
This is a really good question. And I think this is particularly relevant to lawyers. And I'm going to make a quite sweeping, broad statement here. But for a lot of people who go down the traditional route of studying law, myself included, I think we almost think there is this cookie cutter idea of what a lawyer is. You know, a lawyer is a certain way, they speak a certain way, they look a certain way, and you almost sell your soul to law. One of the key things I like to emphasize is authenticity and not being afraid to bring a sense of humor. Anyone who has gone through any of my presentation skills training sessions would know that I think bringing humor is just an amazing equalizer in any setting. Now, of course, there is a nuance to that. Do I think that you should be making a joke out of a really serious $1 million pitch? Absolutely not. You know, read the room. But ultimately, your sense of humor and your approach to things, the things that you're passionate about, they're the things that we want to see in other people. I can read what Claude has provided. I can read what ChatGPT has provided. But how you deliver that, what you're passionate about, all of those things are things that I think are really, really important and that drives the message. So what I see is a weak pitch, a poorly run negotiation, or a leadership team that doesn't command the room really costs money, and you don't really put that on a profit and loss. So I think it's really important to move away from the copy paste strategy. And I'll be honest, I've sat in some really high stakes rooms where people are presenting things, and you will have an executive who just says, you might as well email that to me. And that's another thing that I tend to emphasize. What are you bringing to this that can't just be said via email, via Teams call? What are you bringing to the table that makes you compelling? So I like to focus a lot on that.
From the marketing perspective, it's really interesting that you said that, because with AI, what became possible is for everybody to create a ton of content very easily and bombard the internet with a lot of blog posts that don't carry that unique spark and experience behind it. It's just more of the information that could be correct, could be accurate, but it's again, it's very synthetic. It's something that doesn't have the differentiator. And ironically, with everybody doing that, the right thing, even from the algorithm for better, whether it's SEO or for engine answer optimization, it's actually making sure that the communications that are being produced, whether it's written or video format, brings the unique experience and is not something that the person could have, to your point, read somewhere else or had a short summary instead of a very long blog post. So I think that unique factor is super important. Do you have any maybe pet peeves that you see in somebody's communication that for you is a giveaway that they need to do some work on that department and really improve the way how they communicate?
I honestly think that it's so rapidly evolving that I probably have a new pet peeve every week. You know, the typical contrast in language, it's not this, it's that. I think we've all seen it. It used to be the M dash, it used to be Oxford commas. You know, it's evolving. I try to not get too hung up on what the pet peeve is and understand more about why people are using it and how they could perhaps use it more efficiently. Again, I'm not against it at all. I think what people are doing is they're using it as a quick fix growth opportunity. And what they're not doing is looking at the basics first. So I'm an advocate for getting the basics right. So before you start spending more money on marketing, before you start spending money on acquisitions, get the basics right. So if your marketing approach is to be spitting out a million different articles or blog posts every second, that's great. But have you first fixed your slow response time to inquiries? Have you first fixed your onboarding processes? Have you first fixed your follow-up process? Because ultimately, this scattergun approach to marketing, which most companies can adopt, they will have some effect. Of course, they will reach an audience and you might have an increase in leads as a result. But what you'll very quickly find is that will highlight the gaps that you have already got in your business. So I would urge anyone, before you get carried away with all of the wonders of AI, really make sure that your company foundation sustains what comes out the other end. So the way I like to frame this is, if you couldn't spend another dollar or pound or whatever currency you operate in on marketing, how would you grow revenue from the customers and leads that you already have? And for most companies, that would probably look something like referrals from happy clients, hopefully, growing existing clients, reactivating old clients. And more than anything, I think we are living in a novelty culture where novelty outweighs everything else. And that means that we sometimes forget about customer and client retention. So we're always looking for the next best thing. But we also know that it takes more effort to get a new client than to keep an existing one. So make sure that your existing clients are feeling looked after and increase the value of that existing client, not just for your business, but for that client. So I'm an advocate of doing both. And then I would also say, when it comes to the marketing approach of volume, be very clear on the type of growth you want. Be clear on what your ideal client profile looks like. So when it comes to Knightseth, for example, we are shamelessly selective about the clients that we work with. So it's more of a handpicking. We don't work with all law firms, and that is our intention. We don't intend on having every single law firm as our client. We don't advertise per se. You won't see us spitting out any Claude content anytime soon. Not because I don't agree with it, because I do, and it's that there's a time and a place for it. But we place real value on the type of client rather than having all clients.
I think there's a lot to be said about that virtuous cycle of being selective with the clients you get, because if you get better clients, you're able to do better quality of work. You get more referrals, you retain your clients for longer. So to your point, that makes life for the business and for the clients better. But unfortunately, many firms, smaller and firms going through their early stages of growth, they forget that lesson. And from the perspective of they feel there is a scarcity of clients, they take on any work they can, and that actually creates more harm than good, because the quality of work is not so great. They're not getting the referrals they want. Maybe they're not as profitable. From your experience to that point, what do bigger companies and bigger firms that you've worked with know about being selective and communicating who their ideal client is, compared to the smaller firms that don't do that? What would you recommend as maybe a fix for a smaller firm to communicate in a way that a larger firm would?
I don't know if it comes down so much to size necessarily, but taking your example, I would be very clear again on what your basics are. A lot of time I see a lack of clarity, and this isn't just unique to small companies. This can happen in any company, really, any size, but you need to be able to identify what good looks like. You need to have organizational clarity. Define what success looks like for your team, for your business, for your client. The one thing I keep coming back to is you cannot scale what you haven't defined. So define what that looks like. And when you have defined what that looks like, you will probably find that the market you're trying to capture is smaller than you initially thought. And that would probably be my advice. My overarching advice is create that clarity first, define what success looks like. And I know that's really basic, but ultimately, I'm a really firm believer that you can't scale what you haven't defined.
Absolutely. And we hear that a lot, that the firms want to not be specific in their messaging because, well, we can reach wider audience, but wider audience doesn't mean good business, and it doesn't mean you can help everybody, and being more selective is better. I think when it comes to improving that communication, the messaging, it's really important to build a good feedback loop, because if the firm can't, to your point, they need to understand and they need to set what good looks like. And then they also need to measure to know that they're on the right track. When it comes to measuring the quality of the communication, the fit of the messaging, what would you advise as the KPIs for that feedback loop for somebody to watch out for, to see if they're on the right track towards having the basics sorted, towards improving the way how they communicate?
Yeah. This one, of course, is always going to be slightly trickier because it's subjective. What does good look like? You might have a client who you actually haven't delivered that much for, but they think you're absolutely fantastic, versus another client who you've gone to the end of the world for and they would still not be satisfied. I would always run an assessment on your clients when you onboard them. So when you onboard them, assess what their baseline is, what's working for them at that stage, what's not working, what are their success metrics. So rather than having a blanket success metric for all of your clients, understand what your clients' success metrics are and then measure against that. Come back in a year's time if you worked with them for a year, come back in a week's time, however long that retention period might be, and ask them questions, not only as a business owner, but in terms of my leadership style. It has always come down to learn how to ask really good questions rather than having good answers. And I think when it comes to clients, and especially in the legal field, we get preoccupied with thinking that we have to have really good answers, but make sure that you're asking the client how they perceive the service. What are we doing really well? So this, again, isn't groundbreaking. It's not new, but what are we doing well? What should we stop doing? Where did we exceed your expectations? Where didn't we even meet your expectations? Why didn't we meet your expectations? Did the goalpost shift, or were we always falling short? It's a lot more about an ongoing conversation rather than a one-off. I think what KPIs tend to do is they can create an artificial success story, and sometimes that's quite a lot of noise. And I'm much more old school, I suppose, that I think that an ongoing relationship is much more about the dialogue that you have with the client as opposed to KPIs. Now, KPIs are really important as well, of course. You can't succeed fully if you don't know how well you're doing. But I don't think that comes down to a tick box exercise when it comes to client retention. Now, I will disclaim and say that that works when you're operating at a smaller scale. When you're operating at a large scale, practically having conversations with loads of different clients might not work. But then my advice would be make sure that all clients have a account manager, a person of contact, somebody who is their dedicated go-to. Run sessions with the clients on success and align early on. Make sure that, as I said earlier, that your idea of success is the same as the client's. Otherwise, you're always going to go wrong.
In terms of the KPIs as well, I think there's a story from Amazon that they had a saying that if there's a difference between data and anecdotal evidence, they should rely on anecdotal evidence and not the data. Because to your point, KPIs is important, but it can mislead you. Another thing that I want to explore more based on what you just said, whether it's working with a high profile client or I guess in your business as well, working with the managing partners, somebody that's brilliant at what they do, they also can be very, of course, opinionated, and they might not perceive the direct advice on what they should do very easily. And I think, to your point, asking questions together and having a really good question is a much better way to continuously find the truth without necessarily, even with the best intentions from every side, getting into that sort of the argument of what's the right course of action when you and your clients and any lawyer, their client, are engaged in that exercise of asking good questions, finding the truth together, and adjusting it as things might change over the course of the partnership. I guess you found that to be the best way to work with the firms and managing partners.
I think this is probably going to tie in with what we just spoke about, but a lot of the time, and in many businesses, I say many businesses, the businesses that I've had the pleasure of working with, it's really easy to confuse activity with momentum. So you'll have lots of campaigns running, lots of clients, you might have a full pipeline, you might have a really busy team, but there's still that underlying frustration that the revenue doesn't mirror that. So activity without some level of intelligence underneath it is going to produce noise, not growth. That intelligence can be KPIs, as you mentioned, but it can also be the narrative, it can be the anecdote, it can be the corridor conversations. And a leader who breaks through these are probably the ones who are able to really unlock the next step of growth.
I want to, for the final part of our conversation, I want to talk about what you see as the best tools of growing the company and establishing good the partnerships in 2026. As you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of activity, but not necessarily progress. When it comes to the best way to build real connections, communicate what the business is exceptional at and putting that out in the world, what do you see as the best marketing strategies or channels that more firms should be paying attention to?
Okay, so I'm going to speak on this from the Knightseth angle, because what I see as being really important is the communication skills to execute. So we spoke about how everybody has access to the same tools, or they could have access to the same tools. Make sure that you actually have the communication skills to back that up. Most of the time, yes, you'll be behind a screen. Yes, you might be behind your keyboard and you can send something off and it looks polished. But can you back that up when you're in person? Do you have the same warmth? Do you have the same tone of delivery? Can you actually follow through? And I think that's going to be really key. When there is so much sharp and when there's so much sharp marketing out there, make sure that you're clear then that you can follow through down the line. So companies invest in strategy, they invest in expertise, but they don't invest in the communication skills to execute on that. So you can have the right answer, you can have the right marketing, but you can still lose the room if you don't close that gap. And I spoke about that gap before. That gap is ultimately what's going to lead to a deal not being closed. I think this goes for marketing, but leadership in general. don't wait until something is broken to invest in it. So the professionals who come to Knightseth early, before a big pitch, before a career move, before they reach partnership track, they're the ones who win. And I would say when it comes to marketing, it's the same thing. Don't wait for your marketing to not work to fix it. Be very clear on who you are, what the message you're trying to put out is, and that you can follow through with that message, because your people are your best spokespeople. So when they're out in the field, they're out in front of the client, your marketing approach needs to be mirrored in those people. So don't get caught up in just hiring the best technical talent, because technical talent doesn't speak for itself. The best legal minds, the best strategists, they can all underperform because they don't communicate in a way that brings others with them. So leadership and marketing is ultimately a communication job. Hiring processes doesn't screen for it. But increasingly, and at Rubik's, I would say that they have managed to do this in a way which I find really compelling. But we're surrounded by people who aren't afraid to have fun. They're not afraid to bring their true, authentic self to the business. And actually, that becomes the USP, that people are able to be unique. They are able to be fun, and they are able to be authentic in a way that makes you want to work with them. It wasn't an easy move necessarily, but it didn't take long for me to realize that having people who can be authentic, even within a global business, is going to be more and more important when marketing increasingly looks the same.
Do you think there's also place for maybe making it more acceptable to have damage and admissions as a part of typical communication that also brings that authenticity? Because too often the companies, they try to look perfect, and because of that, they can actually alienate somebody that might resonate with maybe some of their faults that just make them human and relatable. And actually having those small damage and admissions could be a great way to build trust and show who you are, what you learned historically. And more lawyers and more professionals should actually be encouraged to make that part of the way how they communicate.
Yeah, this is really interesting. And I think a lot of lawyers, because the risk aversion element of it, are going to feel uncomfortable with this. And I'm not advocating recklessness or that you should intentionally make things so bad that it's a risk to the business. But I also think that a lot of us have been seeing more and more people adding in spelling errors in their blog posts or marketing initiatives, because it actually makes you think that there's a human behind it, and that draws you in more than something that's perfectly polished. So I do think there is a room for rawness in marketing, some admission of flaw or fault, absolutely, and in a way which is innocuous and not damaging. So a lot of companies that I think do this well is, our bad, we did this, and as a result of our mistake, we're now going to give you 100 free hours, whatever it might be. So you're actually using it as an opportunity to provide value to your client, not just saying we're flawed. So yeah, I would agree with that.
Sounds great. What's for the remainder of this year for you personally? What's the big whether it's a marketing goal or anything that maybe you're working on? What's the big project that you're focusing most of your energies for the rest of this year?
So when it comes to marketing specifically, when it comes to Rubik's, we're really lucky that we have got a fantastic CMO. I will be involved with consulting on initiatives, but she's fantastic. And it's one of the things I would advocate for in general is be very mindful of your own limitations. Don't be afraid to release control to those who are experts. And if you have a fantastic CMO, why would I really get involved? I shouldn't, and I don't to the extent that it's one of my main priorities. With Knightseth, on the other hand, as I mentioned earlier in our conversation, we're a lot more selective about the clients that we work with. So our clients are law firms, and our focus is going to be on working with some really amazing junior lawyers, some really amazing summer interns. And we start this process early because we know that for a lawyer, they're hopefully going to have a very long career trajectory in front of them. So if we can start building relationships with them when they are junior associates or summer interns, the likelihood is that we can go with them on their career trajectory. So it's an organic growth where we grow with them. And what that means is I might have sessions with summer associates in July, for example, and then they go off and they become a associate at the firm. And then a few years later, I have a phone call, an email from the same lawyer saying, I really valued our time together. I'm now looking to become partner. I need help to take my communication skills to that next level. So the marketing approach there is very much about building long-lasting relationships rather than a one-hit wonder. We don't actively have marketing initiatives. With that said, I have seen the benefits of having a CMO, for example, and I'm not averse to fractional leadership. I think it's something that should be embraced because it's one of the big things that hold companies back. They think they should do everything, and learning when to outsource or when to delegate is key. So when it comes to the point of wanting to grow the business in a different way, that's something I might consider in terms of my initiatives.
Makes a lot of sense. And for somebody that's interested to learn more about your work and about Ruvix or Knightseth, where should they go online to find out more about what you do and how they maybe can get involved?
Absolutely. So when it comes to Ruvix, you can visit our website at ruvix.com. And we're also on LinkedIn, so Ruvix Inc. You can find us there. And when it comes to Knightseth, we keep a slightly lower profile, but we do have a website. So the website is Knightseth.com. So that's Knight with a K. And we do have a very small LinkedIn presence as well. We welcome email, so we have an info at knightseth.com email, and it's a lot smaller scale and much more bespoke. So I would urge people to email rather than to expect a grand presence online.
Sounds good. And we will make sure to put the links as well in the notes so everybody can find it easily. Hannah, thank you so much for coming on today, and we appreciate your insights. I'm sure many in our audience will find them very valuable.
Thank you so much, Alex. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.